Welcome, and I am so happy to introduce my dear friend and a person that I look up to and admire. Dr. Margaret Meloni is here with us to be our speaker, and I'm very, very grateful and excited. Margaret was my school buddy at University of the West, fellow PhD student. And yeah, when I first started University of the West, I didn't know I was already practicing Zazen and meditation, but I didn't know too much about Buddhism, as an academic field. And I was so lost, but then Margaret's warm, demeanor and just her presence really, I remember, really comforted me, and I felt very welcome in the classroom, and I'm still grateful for that. Margaret is a business person as well, as a Buddhist practitioner. She serves as chairwoman of the board for Buddhist Alliance. There's another person, Buddhist Alliance. What was that? Buddhist?
Oh, the Engaged Buddhist Alliance.
Engaged Buddhist
Thanks,
Alliance. And she also teaches project management at various universities as well. So she's really multifaceted and multi-talented. And she has written 2 books, both of them on death. And so she knows a lot about death from her experience, as well as Buddhist studies, Dharma, as a death as Dharma. So she wants to talk to us about that, how to prepare for death of our loved ones and of our own death. And so I'd just like to welcome Dr. Margaret Meloni, and she has, I'm going to wait for it. I'm going to spotlight you.
Ta-da!
Now you can screen share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. What a lovely introduction, and thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I am going to share something. Oops, it's not showing up. Okay. And thank you so much, all of you, for trusting me today. I'll say with your time and your brain space. I appreciate that so much. And it's lovely to be here. And, it's true. So, there are people who say to me, why are you always about death? I don't know if I'm always about death, but yeah, I do talk about it a lot and I write about it. And not from, the perspective of, oh, this is terrible or sad, but, people will say, like, you already went through the deaths of your loved ones. So like, why are you purposefully thinking about that again? Right? Like, why don't you just put it away? I think is what people kind of say, like, can you just put that away? And I do use this analogy that it's, like preparing to run a marathon, but most of us, I don't think, could just get up the day of the marathon and run the full thing without any training. I certainly couldn't. Also, I will just tell you the irony in me using that example is that I don't even run. So if I was preparing for a marathon, I would need a lot of help. But this is what struck me, I guess, because of the idea of, like, aspects of life. Sometimes it does feel like a marathon, right? Like, this isn't a sprint that we're in. And so, like, if we didn't train for life or for the actual, running the marathon, you might do it. Man, it's going to be painful. It's just going to be really hard. So, and I'm not suggesting that running a marathon is going to be easy. And I'm not going to suggest to you that life and death is always going to be easy. But what I am happy to discuss with you today is that, the more we prepare, the better our outcome is going to be. So training, thinking about death isn't pessimism. I like to think of it as realism. I like to think of it as this is how we're supporting ourselves, right? And maybe this is a fine point. This is a fine point, but I don't know if any of your friends have said to some of you that Buddhism, you guys, you're talking about suffering all the time. What is with you and all the suffering, and I don't think it's about suffering. Yes, we acknowledge there is suffering. I like to think that it's about the alleviation of suffering. If you have back pain, I hope you don't, but if you have back pain and you go to the doctor for that back pain, do you pretend that the pain doesn't exist? Or do you openly acknowledge the pain in the hopes of finding some ways to decrease the pain? Well, some people are afraid of doctors. We have those friends. I'm guessing it's not you because you are here with me today. So if you're willing to have this discussion, you're probably also not really afraid to go to your doctor when something seems off. But some people are afraid and afraid of changes. Well, if I go to the doctor, then the doctor's going to tell me I need to make some changes, and I don't want to make changes because that's hard. And so I'm going to opt to live with my pain. And this is a choice. And we can opt to live with, I'll say, suffering in its raw form, or we can recognize there is suffering and use our practice for the purpose of helping to transcend that suffering, right? To recognize that there's a way out and to be open to looking for that way out. And this is true with the fact that there's going to be death. We can be open to looking for ways to be ready, to feel comfortable. Another way I like to call it is death awareness, or being death ready. These are some other terms that I frequently use. So where to begin? I had the lovely opportunity to speak to Venerable Carme Lecce Somo. She gave me some of her time. I had this opportunity to interview 12 different Buddhist spiritual teachers. And definitely I interviewed them about their experiences around death. I knew what I had experienced and how it was. And then I was curious and I was like, well, what is this like for these, people who are very advanced on the path, that these people are, way ahead of me. I'm just a layperson practitioner. What is it like for these advanced spiritual teachers? And so Venerable Carme Lecce Somo was somebody who was very generous with her time. And I remember talking to her, and one of the things she said to me when we were talking about people having grief, and she said, it's so important to meet people where they are, right? It's so important to meet people where they are. And I just carry this around with me. And it occurred to me, she's not just talking about other people. It's also important for us to meet ourselves where we are. So as we talk today, and I'm asking you to think and giving you some ideas about, some steps to take for a plan, it's so important for all of us to meet ourselves where we are. And you don't have to say to the whole group where you are. That's you. That's part of your practice. That's your world. But really be honest about where you are with this topic. Like, you might just be here today because you think I should think about this, but I don't really want to. You might be all in. You might be the person who's sitting there, and you could be doing the talking and I could be listening and learning from you right now. So just meet yourself where you are. And that's how you carry yourself forward. And wherever you are, that's the right place for you. So it's really important for there not to be blame or shame or shoulding. I should be farther along with this. I should already know how to do this. No. Where are you? Let's go from there. That's what we're going to do. Many of us, we need to start small. When I'm saying start small, I'm saying we don't have to go right to, I'm going to die. Like, I know I'm going to die. And I think, like, we know it logically. We know this in our heads. Like, we know when there's birth, that the way out is death. We know this, right? I've only known one person in my life who really truly believed otherwise. I will say that. I had a friend's mother once who really believed that it was going to be different from her. It's the only person I've ever met. So we know it, but we can still start small. We can benefit, most of us, from truly, reflecting on the truth that there is suffering and the source of that suffering. I'm very big on going back to the Four Noble Truths. I guess I'm maybe call me basic. I'm basic. And I really believe in going back to those Four Noble Truths. And however you express them, right? Because some people say them differently. Like, some people say the truth is suffering. Some people prefer to say life is suffering. Some people prefer to say there is discomfort or dis-ease, or there is dissatisfaction, or to just simply use the word dukkha, because sometimes dukkha is hard to translate exactly. So, but the truth is, I'm going to just say suffering for our time together today. The truth is, there is suffering, and I suffer because I want things, and I want people, and I want outcomes. And there's things I don't want. I don't want to lose someone I love. I don't want to say goodbye to people. I don't want my best friend to move away. I don't want to be sick. I don't want people I care about to be sick. It's a lot. It's a lot. And that's why I recommend, like, this is a great place to start with. Where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? And then I like us to now add to the mix. So we've got our Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. This is why I suffer. There is a way out. Yes, of course, there's a way out. And then I encourage us, let's bring impermanence into the mix. Let's now consider impermanence. Things are always changing. Things are always changing. And the more that, we hang on to perceptions of how things must be. I'm only going to be happy today if it breaks 65 degrees. I'm in Southern California. So, if it's below 70, we're pretty sure if it's below 70, we think we are dying, just so you all know. So I'm only happy today if it gets between 65 and 70. Well, guess what, everyone? It's not. And yet I'm happy. I'm here with you. I'm happy. So it's going to be okay. Right. But the more that we really hang on to these perceptions of how things must be, the more difficult our lives become. And what I'm asking, in keeping with recognizing the Four Noble Truths, incorporating impermanence, and starting small, is I'm asking us all to think about our plans for the day. So my plan for the day was that it was going to be 75 and I was going to be, out on the porch in the sun. That's not how it's going. That's not how it's going. Sometimes things go exactly as you imagined. That's amazing. That's amazing. Other times, the entire day is a disaster. Or is it? Or is it? Right? Because when our plans fall apart, we're presented with this opportunity to embrace impermanence. Right? So when our plans fall apart, this is this lovely opportunity. I know it doesn't always feel like it, right? But this is this lovely opportunity. And these broken plans, these are a representation of death, right? You didn't think I forgot about the fact that we're here to talk about death, did you? These broken plans, these are a representation of death. So something that you relied upon went away. The sunshine the lunch plan, the walking with your best friend, going to a movie, going to a restaurant, being here today. There's probably some people who meant to be here right now and couldn't be here right now, right? An assumption becomes invalid. Something you love, a cherished thing, breaks. A relationship ends. We want to pay attention. We want to pay attention to our emotions as we watch our plans die. And also, we want to pay attention to our emotions as we watch our plans die with acceptance, with acceptance. So the difference right here in this part is I'm so upset because things aren't the way I wanted them to be versus things are different than I thought they would be. This is impermanence. My life has uncertainty in it. And then when we're ready, we can begin to project beyond our daily plans. For example, the other day, I have also just a little background before I tell the story. I have an older home, and the reason that's part of the story is I have an old floor heater. And so as you can guess, if it's a chilly morning, again, California cold, if it's California cold, then the warmest place to be is in the room where the floor heater is. And so one morning I decided that's what I was going to do. I was going to start my day downstairs, sitting near the floor heater because I was feeling California cold. And I looked over and I came downstairs and it was cold. And I was like, I don't think it's supposed to be like that. And then I looked over at the heater, the thermostat, and it was completely blank. And in my head, I watched myself because I try to practice what I talk about. So I watched myself go from, oh, bleep, the heater's broken. And in my head, I'm rearranging my entire day, right? I'm like, okay, now I've got to call and I got to see if a person can come and fix it. And then I've got to make sure I can be here and make plans around the heater, blah, blah, blah. And that was, my plans falling apart in impermanence in motion until, and this is another part of impermanence, I looked and I realized, oh yeah, my thermostat uses batteries. So the first thing I should do is take it apart and check the batteries. And then sure enough, I have no idea when the last time was that I replaced those batteries. And I replaced the batteries. And then my day fell back into a different kind of rhythm because I no longer had to think, I have to call the person to come, then I have to be here, and I wonder how expensive it's going to be. Now it was, oh, I need to go to the drawer and see if I have AAA batteries. And luckily I do. And those are the last ones that are left. So now maybe as part of my day, I should go buy more before I forget, right? This is how our days go. So we really want to pay attention as we watch our plans die. And then we want to learn and practice to watching our plans die with acceptance, all right? The plans that you made, for your week, your month, your year, this is all built right on these perceptions of control, an illusion of certainty. But these plans, they do help us navigate our lives. I'm not saying don't make plans. Keep making plans. These help us, right? We're human. We live within the confines of time and marking time, and we make plans, and there's nothing wrong with that. Make plans and acknowledge that as you do, there will be impermanence. Some of your plans or elements of your plans are going to die. They're just not going to happen. They're going to die. When they do, call it death. Start calling it death. Let's consider, instead of saying my plans changed or my plans are different or my plans fell apart, let's introduce my plans died. because it is a kind of death. It is a kind of death. In fact, some of you, I think you know this, but I do have a podcast called the Death Dhamma podcast. And it's in its second season. In the first season, we talked about what I say, death with a capital D, which was me talking to those 12 wise teachers and interviewing them about, their experiences with death of a sentient being, and becoming aware of how, sentient beings die. This season, we're talking about death, and I say with the lowercase d. And what I mean by death with the lowercase d is exactly what we're talking about right now, which is ideas die, plans die, relationships die, and that these are all types of deaths. We do mourn them, and they are opportunities to prepare us for the big D, the big death of ourselves, the death of a sentient being that we love. So when we see things change, plans change, your favorite coffee cup breaks, a friendship ends, let's call that death. Because now, when you can do that, now you are living with death. And now you are stepping into death awareness. You're stepping into the awareness of death. And as soon as you can, so as soon as you can move from the death of things and ideas, now let's step into the recognition that you and your loved ones are also impermanent. And allow yourself to entertain the thought, one day I will die. Or today could be my last day. Right? And bring these thoughts into your meditation. Now, this isn't exactly the same as meditating on death. We'll talk about that later. But just bring these thoughts into your meditation and see what arises for you when you think, one day I will die. Or today could be my last day. And see how it feels. Where do you feel it in your body? What arises for you? What arises for you? And let it arise. Let it arise. Try not to turn it off. Just let it arise. And if it's tightness in your throat or tightness in your belly, notice it. Do that, the noting and mark it. This seems unpleasant, or this seems neutral, right? Be aware of those emotions. And one of the other wise teachers that I spoke with, she used this phrase. Let me think if I want to say this the right way, because I really appreciate what she said. And she said, you become scientist and object of your own experiment. And because, what she meant by that you are scientist and object of your own experiment, is that, you're watching as these things are rising for you. And then you're also doing some analytical work. You're analyzing. So you are the scientist and you are the experiment, which would not pass in, scientific labs, but I get her point, right? And so you think what you think and you feel what you feel, and just be with it, If there was a common theme that came up from speaking to 12 different Buddhist spiritual teachers about death and grief, and there were common themes, one of the most prevalent common themes was the reminder that whatever you're feeling is acceptable. Whatever you're feeling is acceptable. And what goes with that is, don't turn it off. Don't turn it off. Now, in keeping with the theme of, knowing, starting where you are, and starting small, I also encourage you to know yourself well enough to know the difference between something that is upsetting and something that is sincerely distressful. And if something is sincerely distressful for you, then do interrupt yourself. And if it is if the feelings are overwhelming, reach out. Don't go through that by yourself. Definitely reach out to your spiritual teacher, reach out to a therapist, a friend, whatever you need. So definitely in keeping with, knowing where you are, definitely I want to add that into that. But otherwise, if you can, be with it. Be with it. What we have in this life is we have this opportunity. We have this opportunity. I am very happy to get to be with you, the Zen peacemakers. And I come to you with respect for Zen Buddhism. And I come to you as somebody who sits in the Theravada tradition. And I think that that's, going to become more apparent as I share with you some of the quotes that I use. So I tend to draw on the Pali Canon because that's the tradition that I'm in. And what I would like to say is, I trust that you will draw on your tradition and the teachings and the teachers in your tradition that are going to help you and make the most sense for you. But this particular passage that is from the Pali Canon is, whether we like it or not, this is really a reminder that if I would say it, if I say it less elegantly, and I will say it less elegantly, clock's ticking. And every day I am closer to death. And, I have less time. And so, that last sentence, this isn't your time to be heedless. We are here now. We have been given the opportunity to practice. We don't know if we will have that opportunity again. Let's make good use of this time. Let's make good use of this time. So it's this recognition of impermanence that I ask you to consider as, let's call it level 1 of your, core training, since we call this core training for death. Let's call this recognition of impermanence. Let's call it your level 1 of core training for death. Everything is rising and falling. Again, I'm paraphrasing other quotes from the Pali Canon, but yeah, I think you've heard these phrases before. Every one of us rises and every one of us ultimately falls. It's important to remember everyone's going to experience death. Everything is going to change. We're all subject to old age, sickness, and death. And I guess I will say old age, if we are lucky, because even on as you get older and things work differently and you feel like it's tougher, it's still a gift because you're here and you still have this opportunity to continue your practice because you're here, right? And so the more that you can be comfortable with the knowledge that you don't get to keep everything, and you can't keep everything and everyone you love, and you can't avoid the things that you don't enjoy, the more that you can embrace those thoughts, I believe the closer that we are to the end of suffering. And that really means the closer we are to suffering from death, And I see somebody has chatted something, so I just want to check and see. Okay, somebody had to leave, but I appreciate that message. I want to say that in our time and what I'm sharing with you, I'm not promising you that by going through some steps and setting up your own plan and incorporating becoming death ready into your practice, I'm not promising you that now it's going to be 100% easy. And I feel like if I made you that promise, I feel like you would distrust me, and you should. And I feel like you should distrust me if I made you that promise. Like, just listen to me and you're never going to be upset by losing a thing ever again. I'm not going to make you that promise. And I recall reading a quote from the Dalai, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where he said when his mother died, he cried. So if he's going to cry when his mother died, then I think it's okay that I still cry. And my mom died in 2014. So I'm not making you promises that you're not going to hurt at all. What I am saying is that when you prepare and you make death part of your everyday life, you're going to experience less clinging, and you're going to experience less suffering, and you're going to hopefully not have those moments where you say, like, why me? Why did this have to happen? Why me? Because so much of our suffering comes from that. Why did this have to happen? As if it's some surprise. And I remember that when I was going through the deaths with some of my family members and friends, they'd say, like, I don't understand why this had to happen. And I know that in that moment, they were maybe trying to make me feel better about my parents dying or my husband dying. But even in that moment, I was thinking, like, well, the timing might stink, but it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise. So as we're incorporating impermanence and we're moving it beyond ideas and things and relationships, we might find it useful to bring some phrases, into our lives. And I don't know that I would exactly use these as mantras, but you might. You might use these as mantras. We too shall pass. I too shall pass. If your parents are still alive, mom and dad too shall pass. Friend, your loved ones, your partners. We can, we live in a society where we're very attached to our animals. So many of our animals are like family members. And this is difficult because our lifespans tend to be so much longer, right? So that too. I have two cats, Willie and Earl. Willie and Earl will pass. Willie and Earl will pass. Other cats before them have passed. I was sad. Mom and dad passed. I will pass. And so I think it's useful to bring these phrases into our lives and, maybe bring them up during the day, or think about them occasionally. Which brings me to what I like to call your level 2, our level 2. Keeping death in mind. Let's keep death in mind. So we don't have to walk around being obsessed with death, even though some of my friends accuse me of that. I have a friend who sometimes calls me the queen of death. I've decided this is a compliment. Yes, thank you very much. I am the queen of death. That's what she says. And I realize that when she's saying that, that's her way of saying also, Margaret, can we talk about something else? Which is great. And by the way, when I'm sitting with my friends, I'm not talking about this all the time, but I think she just really wants to make sure that I know that sometimes she doesn't want to talk about death. And I respect that. So we don't have to be obsessed, but we do want to keep the possibility of death in our thoughts. And if you think about it, you've already begun to do this by using impermanence and the change of your days, and to look at something that's different and call it dying or dead. Recognize the death of that plan, the death of that coffee cup. And think about death throughout your day, And definitely using that phrase, those phrases that we just talked about. Today could be my last day. Because death is just one of the experiences that makes up a life. It's not good or bad. It just is. It just is. And a way to keep death, to make it easier to accept death, is to not turn your head away from it. And what I mean when I say don't turn your head away from it is, don't turn off those thoughts about what will I do when my partner dies? What will my kids do when I'm gone? Don't turn off those thoughts. Have those discussions. One of the best things my parents did with me was when they got to a certain point in their lives, when I would come to visit them, at some part during the visit, they would have a little talk with me about what to do when they died. What to do when they died, what to do if they became incapacitated, what to do when one of them died and the other was still alive. And I have to tell you that at first I did not want to have those discussions, and I could not get through those discussions quickly enough. And I really tried to shut them down, And I'm very fortunate that by the time it was their time, I had learned to listen. And even though I didn't want to listen, I realized that they really wanted me to know. And they were really trying to make it easier for me, because they understood that I was very close to them and that it was going to be really difficult. And they were doing everything they could to make it easier. And once I could finally get through that, so they were very patient with me and I could listen. And when their times came, everything they did in fact make it easier. It definitely made it easier. They definitely were prepared for the business of death. Like, I knew exactly what to do. I knew exactly who to call. My goodness, my dear mother. I say sometimes that I didn't realize that maybe she was a control freak until after she died, because she left me such clear instructions, like, seriously. So we're not Buddhists. And so my mom let me know like what reading she wanted in her funeral mass and who was supposed to do the reading. And she had a backup for that person in case that person died before her. And I knew that we needed to have Carol's cheesecake at the reception that we held in the church basement afterwards. And that she wanted those little mini croissant sandwiches from X bakery. And that was so helpful. So we don't want to turn our heads away from that. So in their way, they went all in with the planning of deaths. Their obituaries were written. Oh my gosh, they were, by the way, super organized people. So we don't want to turn away from that. We don't want to turn away from people who have experienced loss. One of the things I know I learned, and it's okay, but I learned that sometimes people didn't want to talk to me right after some of my family members died, because I represented difficulty and I represented sadness and I represented things that people didn't want to think about that. I get that. In the past, I've been that way. But if we don't turn away, if we can be part of that experience, then we can really be keeping death in mind. So we're not going to ignore people who are sick. If you have a hard time going to the hospital, I get that. If you have hospital, well, putting COVID aside, if you have hospital phobia, I get it. Call, write a letter, something, right? Because ignoring people who are sick doesn't make them well. And refusing to acknowledge death doesn't make you or anyone else immortal, right? And so these are some of the ways we can keep death in mind. Timber Hawkeye, another person who I spoke with, Timber Hawkeye used this phrase with me, this equation, right? Pain, and you might know too, pain plus resistance equals suffering. It's so annoying, and it's so true. The more that we want to avoid suffering, the harder it will be. And the more that you crave or want for the people you love to never have to leave you, the more difficult it will be when they do. My father, I really appreciate my father. When he had terminal lung cancer, and he knew it, he would have good days and bad days, of course, right? This is part of the process. And sometimes he'd have really good days. And on those good days, he would say, let's go do something. And one of their favorite things to do, mom and dad, was to take a road trip. They definitely came from the driving generation. like when I was a kid, I can remember like going on Sunday drives and drives after dinner. So they were all about let's go for a drive. Let's go for a little road trip. And so on those days where my dad felt better, he'd say, let's go for a road trip. And he wasn't going to drive. He would, he would look at me and say, and would you drive? And so we'd have this great afternoon. At some point during that afternoon, my father would just kind of look at us and he'd get this little smile on his face. And he'd say, remember, none of us gets out of this alive. And that wasn't uniquely his saying. I think of it as uniquely my father's saying, but that wasn't uniquely his saying. But he would just say that. He'd do that little smile. And remember, none of us get out of this alive. And he wasn't trying to ruin our day at all. What he was doing, which I became so appreciative of, was he was just reminding us, I'm having a good day today. But he's letting us know, I'm still dying. So that was his way. And it was a very gentle, loving way to just remind us, I'm still dying. But to get us past the resistance, And one of the ways in which I'm so grateful to Buddhism, to my Buddhist practice, was that, of course, it didn't stop people from dying. It's not going to stop me from getting old and dying. It didn't stop me from being 100% sad, but it definitely got me to a place of acceptance so much more quickly. So understanding the Four Noble Truths, understanding impermanence, really got me to a place of, I have a phrase I use. Some people tell me I overuse the phrase, and here I go again. This is how it is. That acceptance, that getting to that, this is how it is. It's one of the best things we can do for ourselves and for the ones around us, for ourselves and for the ones around us. So like if we have someone with us who's ill, coming to that acceptance of, I understand that you are ill. Let's do what we can do together. That is such a gift. That is such a gift, so that we don't give them pressure, like we don't put pressure on them, right? We don't feel pressured, being ill or, dying is hard enough. We don't need to give people pressure. Now, I've learned that across our different Buddhist traditions, most monks and nuns, I want to say all, what happens though when you say like all and ever and never, all, every, never, then you're wrong, right? But in most Buddhist traditions, our monastics, our monks and nuns, chant the 5 recollections every day. Every day. The version I have here in front of you comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. In each tradition, the phrasing might be a little different. I've been on retreats and chanted these. I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There's no way to escape that will help. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature of change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. So here's where we bring in karma. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. We can tape these up, right? You can have these up and, seriously, really consider, go back to them while I say that, really consider chanting this, reading it in whatever way works for you, screensaver, poster, post-it note, in whatever way. And, here's the thing. I think some days, like I know that some days when I've been on retreat and I've chanted this, it's been kind of like perfunctory, right? Like I'm chanting this now and logically I understand the words, and also I'm really tired. But then there's other days where I'm like really all in. So just know that some days you will, if you choose to bring this into your practice, some days it will be really meaningful and some days it'll be just words, because you are a human being and your practice level is going to fluctuate by day. That's just part of being human. But I encourage this. I call this our training level 3, is practicing the 5 recollections. So if we consider, reading these and chanting them every day, and as we use this, following impermanence, so this is like really that integration of impermanence, following impermanence all the way through to a natural conclusion, right? Natural progression, I guess I can say it that way. From plans that died to our actual death, the death of our loved ones, eventually you're going to develop more ease, right? Because you think about like what really frightens us as humans. I mean, okay, apparently spiders and public speaking, but once we get beyond that, so it's a good thing there's not a spider looking at me right now. But if we get beyond that, like the spiders and the public speaking, it's unknown. Things that are unknown make us uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that through our work here in our adding this to our practice, we're going to know how we're going to die or when we're going to die. I'm not telling you that. I'm just saying we will get more comfortable. We will develop ease around the idea that death is ever present. And you will find peace in your awareness of death. You will find peace. Can't promise you we'll know how. Some of us can look at our genetic history and know that, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. I might think I'm going to have heart failure one day, and then I'm going to tell you there's one intersection where I walk with my neighbor where every day, if you don't look, it's worth your life. So it might be heart failure, or it might be the day I forget to look before I stop off the curb. We don't know. We just know it will be. That's what we know. And this brings us to what I like to call our 4th level in our plan, our 4th level in our plan. And that is meditate on death. Now, earlier, I did ask you to consider contemplating death in your meditation. What I'm asking you to do differently here is to really become more focused on it, not the idea of it, not I may die or someday I will die. I mean, so I guess the example I will give is like, so when my father told me he was terminal, I meditated on his death. Not the moment, like I wasn't in my head picturing his last breath, although that is absolutely a form of meditating on death. So well, not so much on the actual moment of his death, but on the fact that he would die, and that I knew how much I loved him, and that it was going to be so hard, and I was going to miss him so much. And I took it as, and here's another thing I'll say, take it as far as you can take it. I took it as far as I could take it at that time in my life, in my practice. And then, a few years later, my husband actually had this, you'd think lung cancer was contagious or something, because he also had lung cancer, the same kind. And he, also was terminal. And I also meditated on his death. And it really helped me embrace or wrap my head around the fact that like, this is happening. So it really helps with like the denial and the pushing away of the idea that like this person I love is they're going, it's going to be in the next few months. I don't know what day, but it's going to happen. And so it really helped me wrap my head around that. There were lots of tears. Oh my gosh, so much ugly crying, but so what? So what if we cry? And you know what else I'll say? Like, if you're walking around during your day and some of these thoughts come up and you cry and it's in public, also, so what? You know, we are human beings. We have emotions. They happen when they happen. I get that we maybe don't like it, but going back to my overused phrase, this is how it is. This is how it is. And so, again, I shared with you that, I come from a Theravada tradition. And in the Theravada tradition, in the Pali Canon, there are some suttas that give instructions on preparing for death. And that is true in your tradition, and that's true in Tibetan Buddhism. And I would encourage you, as part of this level in your plan, in your practice, to look at those. I know that in the Satipatthana Sutta, there are instructions on, how to contemplate the body as the body is breaking up, and to contemplate the different, levels of a body breaking up in a charnel ground, or to remember that as a body goes through various stages of decay, that's going to happen to your body too, right? Because my body is no different than the one that's been cremated. It's just not cremated yet because I'm animated right at this moment. There's another sutta that teaches, the mindfulness of the body and contemplation of impermanence and dissolution. There's a practice we call so easy for me to say. It's a practice we call Maranasati, which is the importance of mindfulness of death. Not just because it makes it easier, but also because it gives us that reminder. And so, I would say, sure, look those up, and also turn to your trusted spiritual teachers and the teachings that you lean on, and use those for your practice, for your ability to meditate on death. And we have sanghas for a reason, right? We have community for a reason. We don't have to do this alone. Wherever you are in this process, remember, meeting yourself where you are. You might be just like curious today and investigating and like, let's see what this Queen of Death lady has to say. You might be ill. You might have someone who's ill. You may have just lost someone. Wherever you are in this process, you're not alone. We, at the very least, we're still able to connect via Zoom. Some people are getting back together in person. So remember your community, and remember, meet yourself where you are. Start small. Most of us don't leap right into, I'm dying. Start small. Let impermanence be your guide, because impermanence really is our teacher in terms of death awareness. And then move on to keep death in mind. This could be my last day. I'm going to die. Consider those 5 recollections, and consider meditating on death, and be patient and loving and compassionate to yourselves, because we're all just finding our way. We're all just finding our way. And when you live with this awareness of death, so there are benefits to this. I've been, hinting at a lot of them, saying them as we go, more peace, more ease. We're not surprised, less clinging. But also, when you really live with this awareness of death, you become more discerning in how you spend your time and your energy. If you really look back at that, now is the time to practice. It's not the time to be heedless. Every day you have fewer days. It's really important to understand the preciousness of each moment, so that we can really place our focus on what is most important. And as you live side by side with the idea of death, you can replace fear with a peaceful acceptance. And from that peaceful acceptance can come the ability to live and love without attachment. And that would be a wonderful release from suffering, don't you think? I think so. So thank you so much for letting me share that with you and go through those levels or steps. And gosh, I would really love it if now I was not the only one speaking. So I'm hoping that you have things to say and questions and comments, and let's open it up.
Thank you, Margaret. If you could stop sharing the screen, then we can see everyone. Wow, it's so profound and so practical. And as I was listening, I was just nodding and taking notes, nodding and taking notes. And it's so much wisdom in there. I'm sure you all have questions. I will stop the spotlight here, and you can change the screen to gallery view on the top right. You can see everyone. I'm sure you all have questions or comments, and there's Patricia said, thank you for your wisdom. And you can, if you have any questions or comments, please wave your hand, or you can use your electronic hand, or whichever. I would love to invite you to share your experience as well, or questions, comments. We're taking notes, and we're just like.
Well, the good news is it's recorded, so you can go back through it again.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for being here.
Okay, some people had to leave after an hour, so yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. So well, I have a kind of a comment if while everybody else is thinking, formulating their question or comments. Being a hospice chaplain really helped to prepare, because I was faced with death, and I was talking about death, like you were saying, every day. And so, when my mother got on hospice, I knew when to get her on hospice, and ask her about funeral, but she wasn't ready. And she said, I don't want a funeral. I said, well, funeral is really for people who are left behind.
Yeah.
So, I managed to get her to, tell me, but it was still very difficult to afterwards. Anticipatory grief was worse than afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. Afterwards, I felt release, like she was released from her suffering, and I felt released. So it's more of that anticipatory grief, and being friend to that, and be able to sit with it, And my question is, how did you handle that anticipatory grief with your Dhamma? Or was meditation on Karuna helpful, compassion or Metta meditation helpful? You gave us a lot of practical advice, but what specifically did you yourself use?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because it is hard. And so I remember, like with my husband, Ed, when he was able, we would just each day we would kind of wake up. So now this is really germane to, and a lot of what I talk to is about terminal illness. And I think we should also talk about sudden death too. But so like we would just wake up each day and kind of see how he was doing. and then see what he felt up to. And I was still working. And so that, okay, to some people that is controversial. So what I will say is, and he and I talked about this, and I even remember talking about this with a chaplain person at the hospital where he was being treated, and saying, am I a bad person because I'm still doing some work, and I worked at home. And they were like, no, if that is the thing that helps you kind of keep your groundedness, then keep doing that. Like I wasn't like working so much that I was ignoring him, but there was part of me that being rooted in some of my work was useful, because that was what I was going to be doing when he was gone. That was going to keep me going. And I was still going to be a person who needed to buy food and things after he was gone. So I think it was the balance between having some unplanned time and keeping some semblance, when possible, of normalcy in my day helped. There was an expression that Casey, one of my teachers, taught me, and Casey was and still is, the leader of like the Long Beach meditation, Insight Long Beach meditation group. And he would actually come to the house and meditate with us. Well, it was in hospice, because we did home hospice. And Casey had this saying, which I just came to really play over in my head, which was, every day the living are dying and the dying are living. And I know that was so helpful to me, because it was like, Ed's going to die. It might be today, but it also might not be today. So I was at a combination of coming up with whatever works for you. So if you need structure in your lives, I'm that person, have some of that. Definitely the spiritual practice. And then being kind to yourself, because there were days when I couldn't meditate. And there were definitely days immediately after his death where I just couldn't meditate. And then what I learned later was that what could have been helpful, and I just wasn't in a place of awareness, was walking meditation. Because there were times when I couldn't sit. And so these are things. Now let's think about, like, with sudden death. I think with sudden death, you're not going through this process. You have this, someday somebody's going to die, but like, it's like, like that, if I really do step off that curb that day and not look, and then like people are going to be shocked. They're going to have to deal with, like, Margaret was here, now she's gone. And that's very hard. And with that, I think what is helpful for us is that, well, I knew death was always a possibility. Because the truth of what happened was that my mother, she was 86. So it's not like her death was a surprise. She was 86. Dad had already been dead for 2 years. My mom died 5 days before Ed died. So in a way, her death was a surprise, but then kind of not a surprise, right?
Wow.
But the timing. And so one of the things that just helped me with that was like, but you knew this could happen. And you knew she was missing Dad. And that when we are older and we lose our partners, it's statistically likely how things will go, so anyway.
When it's, multiple deaths all at once, it's like, I don't, one grieves one at a time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's where having a helpful community was so good, because, she was up in Washington State and I was down here in California, and I couldn't go. And, she had a lovely community that from her church. She had a lovely community, and those people really stepped in. And, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have done.
Hi, John. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, well, this is really timely, Margaret. I don't know whether there's any time that it isn't timely, but I'm missing a men's group this evening and the topic is, did you ever have a really meaningful conversation around death with someone who was about to die? And that was, and I think about that because I've been around a few people at the time of death, and recognizing that there were measures taken to keep their heart beating, but their mind not present. And recognizing, oh, this is too late for this conversation. Yeah, because they're not available. Should have done it earlier, when it was more uncomfortable, because it was unknown, unpredictable. But one of the things that I have experienced and that I hold in the contemplation of my death is that a few times there have been some extraordinary things happen at the time of someone's death, on the level of miracles, and that it is, I believe, a parting gift to the one who's dying. I've come across another way of hearing the word wake around death, and it is the energy disruption of a body of water, and is what we know it as from that perspective, where things are different. The kind of the rules are different when someone dies, and that in my contemplation of this moment, for myself, I want to be able to, or willing to, leave a wake where the rules are different, for people who are willing to experience that and have something unusual happen for them, that is beneficial.
So you said a lot of important things. I feel like one of the things you were kind of reminding us of was the importance of a do not resuscitate. I think that's one of the first things you said, right? Because I could be in an advanced stage and I can no longer say. And so, yes, it is important if we have that, if we feel that way, to have that do not resuscitate form filled out and in the folder, and definitely. And if you don't feel that way, then don't have that. Like I used to work with someone, and she used to say, when we would do practice drills, you know how in corporate offices you have to do practice drills in case there's an emergency. I had this boss, and she would always say, even in the practice drills, she's like, I don't care if I am decapitated, you tag me as the first person who gets treatment because I want to live. So she probably doesn't have a do not resuscitate. So like, this is a decision and she was joking, but not joking. So this is a decision that's really important to make. And then I feel like, John, I think what you're saying, I feel like you're pointing us at the importance of, if you are that person who can sit with the dying peacefully and help them have the experience of dying and have their experience of dying, the sanctity part of the moment. And that you're right. And there are things that you'll see as someone's dying that are miraculous, right? So I feel like that's what you're sharing. And then now you're also saying that, I think you're saying about your preparation for yourself, that you can be prepared to have your own peaceful moment, and that others can be with you and see the miracle of the transition. Am I?
Yeah.
Because I really appreciate what you've brought to us.
Yeah, that's a good interpretation of what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. And some people, and again, in our different traditions, there's different ways of preparing, right? And I don't know all of this 100%. And even though we were Theravada, I'm pretty sure that my husband did read a lot of the Tibetan materials on dying, the Tibetan book of dying, and I think in a way that did help him. So. Yes.
Yes, thank you, John. That was
Thanks, John, so much.
Yeah, Nadia, hi.
Thank you for being here when you were missing another group.
I have a question. I experienced lots of people dying around me. My husband died at 40. My mom died 2 years later. My dad died right away, and my best friend as well. So in 2 years.
Yeah.
My mom died 2 days before I had my first child. And I have kept a lot of anger, a lot of feeling of unfairness for a very long time. And then I work and Buddhism and Zen and meditation. And I got to a point of pretty much what you were saying is it is what it is. I couldn't do anything about it. It happened. I have to live with it. But my question is, as much as I have learned to deal with close deaths, like I'm terrified right now, my husband would die, but it is constantly in me. So I feel like you were saying, I've made friends with it. It can happen.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with what's going on in Ukraine right now? Like, it is devastating me. How can I go, it is what it is? It is people I don't know, but it is just taking my guts, and I feel like crying all the time. How do you deal with this abstraction? It's real people, but it's people I don't know, and it feels like it's worse. I don't know how to deal with it.
I think this is not the time for my "it is what it is" phrase, like, because it seems very heartless and cruel. So I don't want to express it in that way. And I'm sitting here today in some ways feeling very powerless, because as an individual right now today, in many ways, I am powerless. And even if I had superpowers and I could go over to Ukraine, what are the odds of me being able to stop the Russian army and stop the killing? And I can't. So what can I do? Right? What can I do? So it's not, it is what it is, but what we may want to think about is this difficult, harsh thing is happening, and people are being hurt and are dying in what feels unjust and unfair and cruelly. What can I do? And so I apologize because I forget if in Zen meditation is considered a form of action, because in Theravada, meditating and it was sending goodwill is actually considered a form of action. And so you can do that. Another step we can take is finding, if we feel and if we have the financial capacity, finding credible places to send money to help, like the Red Cross and some other credible agencies where we can help. Because what we can't do right now, us sitting here today, is we are not going to be able to go into the Ukraine right now and stop. So what we can do is hold those people in a space of loving compassion and meditate on loving compassion for those who are suffering. And we can go through a wishing that those who are going to die, that they can have as peaceful a death as possible. At least that's what I think of. And now I really invite others to this discussion. Like, let's talk as a group, what other things are we doing? Because it is really hard, and it's easy, I think, to get caught in feeling despair because of feeling powerless.
Because it's not just the death, it's all what's around it, the suffering, the fear, all those kids sitting in subways. And I mean, it's so much suffering that it's like sending money, doing anything seems so little. And plus I'm European, so I'm envisioning all the refugees, they're going to be flooding, and how harsh governments are nowadays. And I mean, it is such a catastrophe coming.
Right.
It's very, very difficult to use my normal way of accepting things the way they happen. I'm very, very difficult for me today.
And we can do good things on their behalf with the idea, and again, the idea that the good deeds you can do on the behalf of others will find them in their next state, and you know what, also, you can also consider taking action in the form of finding a nonprofit to volunteer with who works towards humanitarian efforts.
Afghanistan.
Yeah, right. John.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is really important. I think it's important for me. And that is, I was on just one of the Zen Peacemaker bearing witness practices in South Dakota with the Lakota. And it was very significant for me. And at this moment, what I'm thinking, one of the things that those who have participated in that can do, you don't have to wait for 5 generations to pass or 2 generations to pass before we bear witness to the atrocities happening on both sides of the both ends of the gun, so to speak. That trauma is happening now, and now is probably the most effective time to bear witness to that experience.
And
Yeah, call it out. Let's call it out for what it is, right? Recognize it.
Yeah,
right.
and it's happening, and there are no people involved in it that are not victims of this experience. It doesn't matter whether you're in a tank or in a subway. The trauma is there.
We are all bearing witness to it. And Nadia, I think you feel the pain because you're a bodhisattva, bearing the pain of the world, and you feel so much, you feel compassion. And, we cannot accept the atrocity that's being played out, but you can accept the fact that you are a bodhisattva, And that's tough. It's bearing witness is a real tough practice, but it's so real. And we make, in Zen, we make the 4 vows, yes, 4 vows, numberless creations we vow to receive, or in another translation, all sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. How do we save them? It's a bodhisattva vow. We save ourselves. When we save ourselves, we're saving the world, really, because there's no separation. But conceptually, it's mine. We can't grasp that, but it's tough. It's hard. Like Margaret was saying, accept where we are. We are bodhisattvas sitting here, sending metta, loving kindness to these people suffering in the world, and it's so tough. It's gut clenching, but because that's because you're a bodhisattva.
Yeah, you feel so deeply.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved your first, I think one of the first quotes is that meet the others and myself where they are. I think that was so powerful. I wrote it 5 times. It is very, very powerful for our relationships, for ourselves, for everything. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you to Venerable Karma Lekshe Soma, who said that to me, because, the day she said it to me, how like you'll hear something and you're like, yeah, but then I would say that keeps coming back to me a few times a week. And you're right, in all kinds of different situations, I'll be like, oh. And I bet when she said it, she's like, I know this woman isn't really getting this yet, but being who she is, she probably had high hopes that I would get it. Yeah, it's so helpful. So helpful.
I just put the link in the chat. Zen Peacemakers and Neon Zen Center are collaborating and making this Saturday sitting available. And you know,
Oh, good.
please join us. Yeah, yeah.
Good.
David, you had a hand up, I think.
Thank you, Myoshin. So my answer to the question of what do we do now with what's happening now? And thank you, Nadia, for bringing what's really happening today into this conversation. What came up for me are two sides of the coin. The first side was the one that John talked about. I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2019 with Zen Peacemakers, and noticed that I had been conditioned to not see and reject the German side. And I felt the love of those people and what they had been through as victims of the Holocaust, as my family were victims as well. Both my parents were prisoners there. So when I sit and when I face what's going on now, I include the people on both sides because they're both victims. I have a hard time with compassion for the leaders that caused this, but I do the best I can. And then the other thing that I do, and I, it's abstract, but I really believe that if I face whatever I'm feeling when I'm contemplating what's happening, the war, if I face my feelings, I meet, as you put it, myself where I am, and I stay with that. I don't turn away and numb myself. If I meet those feelings and allow them to find their own way within me without hiding from them, I believe that that is doing good on a larger scale. So those are the two ways that I face.
I do think
to me, that's action.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It is. I believe too. It's a form of action.
Kanisal Bhikkhu said, how can we not just sit here and practice when the world is falling apart? we have to practice ourselves first.
Right. Sometimes when I say it's all we have, but it's so much, but sometimes what we have is our practice.